Thank you everyone for being here tonight for the lecture. Before I get started, I do want to start with the land acknowledgement. I'd like to respectfully acknowledge that this land is not only home, but held the history to a diverse number of Native American nations. To my knowledge, the Kansas City region extends across the ancestral lands of the Osage, Kaw, Kansa, the Oto Missourian nations. And during 1800s, many Native American nations were forcibly relocated to the region, including the Shawnee, Wyandot, Delaware, Munsee, Potawatomi, Sac and Fox, and the Kickapoo nations, each with its own history and tradition. And decades later, many of these nations were again forced to move. I also want to acknowledge the enslaved African people whose labor was used to establish the economy of our city and region. I will continue to learn about the history of the land I stand on, listening and learning deeply from those who I am in relationship with. In this region, including with you all, to take pause, to rest, and to decolonize. As for myself, I'm an immigrant to this land, and my ancestors are the Han Chinese, the Hakka people, and the Japanese. And I'm thankful for the land I'm on, for the people, the ancestor, and the history that came before me that led me here to establish my roots. I chose to set roots here, and I acknowledge my responsibility to this land and for generations that'll come after me. So thank you for having me here. To start my talk, I always like to share the story about the wind telephone, Kaze no Denwa. It's a wooden telephone booth with a black rotary phone that's connected to nothing. It appeared after the tsunami in Japan and sits on top of a hill overlooking the city of Otsuchi, where the tsunami swept through. And people would come from all over Japan to speak into the Kaze no Denwa, hoping their words would be carried by wind and be heard by their loved ones who were gone. It's a way of communication, it's a way of reaching across far distances and a way of connecting that I understand too well. Growing up in two countries, I'm aware of that distance between my Taiwan home and my America home. And this distance is bridged by my dad, who traveled back and forth between these two countries. And I want to share this series of prints. The series is titled Collect Calls, and it's about those expensive phone calls my dad would place to reach me from Taiwan. And for 15 years of my life, my dad called me every single day. He was the voice on the other side of the telephone. My dad has since passed away, and once in a while, I would still have conversation with him, just letting him know, I'm good, I'm doing well, and please don't worry about me. My father used to visit the US every 3 months for green card purposes, and I remember him constantly packing and unpacking luggages. His dream was to eventually move to the US and live with us, and that packing and unpacking become this ritual for him. And throughout the years, he kept bringing things from Taiwan to the US to make the American home feel more comfortable and more familiar. And this suitcase was the subject of my story at a local show and tell series, The Shelf Life, hosted by my friend David Wayne Reed. As I reflect on the significance of the way my family and I carried our messy roots with us wherever we go. And in thinking of my dad's ritual, each item he chose to bring with him, he saw it in his vision of a life in America. Each item, a seed. In sharing that story with you, I ask everyone to take pause and consider how we attach meaning to things, how our lived experience imbues stories and narratives to every interaction and every relationship we have in our lives. This is Chris Ying's work, titled Vessels, Everything is Exactly the Same. I love the way she notices and questions the mundane. What may seem ordinary in others' eyes, these assortment of objects exemplify these minor feelings of incongruency that I often felt in my life as well. Similarly, my friend Yumi Nam's work, where she creates these lyrical lithography of delicate flower arrangements as they emerge out of instant noodle cups and frivolous Five Guy containers. I feel kingship with these artists' work. And this is Chie Fueki, and her work really sings to me. I love her interest in layers and symbols, motifs, metaphorical icons that floods and overwhelm the surface of her paintings and drawings. It's her own language, a love letter to herself. And in reading an interview of Chie with Jennifer Samet recently, I came across this passage, and I just want to share with you all. I'll read it. There's this famous Philip Guston quote about how you begin in the studio with all of history and your friends, and then one by one, all the people leave. Well, I don't want for them to leave. I always hear them. I hear every comment. I hear everybody. It's not only my teachers or art histories, the friendship and the dialogue I have with my peers is really important. I learn from them so much. This is a quote by Chie. And I'm sharing with you this because I love this quote. It basically said, hey, Guston, you're a great painter, but I experience things differently. There's this myth of the solitude of an artist's studio, the notion of stripping away everything but the work. But I want to challenge that. I don't think that's true, at least not for me. As artists, we're a translator of experiences, and especially in this day and age, we're bombarded by so much. I want to share this quote because I recognize the importance of my peers, of my lived experience, of my learned history, of everything that is happening around us. And even in the imagining of the future, these are building blocks of my work. And with community in mind, I also resonate with these artists in the way they represent their nuanced experience of being in community with others, in celebrating the joy, sharing the unseen and the untold narratives. I can get lovingly lost in Elisa Niesenbaum's and Nicole Eisenman's work. I get transported into the intimately specific and relatable spaces in their painting. So in my recent work, I think deeply of what stories I choose to tell. Who and where is my community and how I relate to others around me. And I think this feels especially relevant in how we relate to others during these last 2 years. I think about the technologies that allowed us sometimes the most intimate connection through a video or a text to keep in touch with those we love. And on the reverse, these technologies also makes us lose touch to our reality, the dividing social media feed and the disconnect. This piece is called Your Space, My Space. The My Space part of it kind of dates it. I really think about like the posture, the way how body tense up or relax, and what that conveys. I love focusing on the hands too, the way it holds, it grips. How casual and instantly gratifying a swipe or a tap is versus the physical impression of a touch or an embrace. As many of you might have noticed in this current show, my grandma is my muse. 2 years into the pandemic, I believe everyone is very familiar with these Zoom and FaceTime interactions, but this is something I've been doing with my grandma for years. She lives in Taiwan. I call her 外婆, which means grandma in Chinese. And this is how I connect with her across long distances. She's 98 now and has dementia. Most of the time she doesn't remember who I am, and of course this technology actually confuses her even more. This is a response to that. This piece is called So Close and So Far. She feels so close to me when I see her face next to mine on my iPad, but it only reminds me how physically far away she is. 7,500 miles and across an ocean, to be exact, and I'm not there touching her, hugging her. And every family deals with dementia in different ways. Back at home in Taiwan, my mom puts up signs by everything in the house to remind my grandma to turn off the TV, don't open doors to strangers. And occasionally, there'll be a sign that says, it's okay if you can't remember. When I visit Taiwan, this is like more than 4 years ago now, usually when I first arrive, I would be up all night, jet lagged. And sometimes I would find my grandma wandering around the kitchen in the middle of the night, putting things away, rearranging things, just like my dad's ritual of packing and unpacking. I think Waipo will rearrange things until it feels really familiar to her once upon a time. In many of my work, I really think about that distance. I can feel the distance widening between the two of us. And seeing her down the hallway sometimes, she would actually hide from me, not knowing who I am. Well, in these last 2 years, not being able to travel, my family has never felt further away from me. Nonetheless, our ritual of bridging distances has turned into this incredible cross-generational collaboration. So, meet my collaborators. This is my mom and my grandma. In these last 2 years, my mom has been taking me along their walks and their bus rides through the city of Taipei. Every gesture, a wave, a reach, a lingering remote touch, all separated by our phone screens. So here are a few examples that emerge out of these exchanges these last few years. In my studio, I've also been exploring clay and sculpture works, and I love how these gestures tells a story. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention the incredible clay community here in Kansas City and on all the support that they have given me to kind of allow me to play with this medium. And of course, all the conversations that I've had with artists over the last 2 years to get me to where I am. Oh, and here's a little video of this turning. So these are all works in progress. So this is kind of like the newest thing in the studio. This piece is titled Neon Lights Lullaby. And this is kind of an example of when I think about that generational overlap that I start to experience. My mom has been telling me that one thing that brings life to my grandma is taking her out for a bus ride at night, watching the ceaseless night lights goes by. My mom then would recall how I, as a baby, would cry at night, and the only thing that would calm me is a night ride lit by passing neon lights. To me, that parallel, expand, and collapse time and space. So at this moment, I think we're all forming new memories and new ways of being. That thread of connection felt so tenuous to me, but it held true and steady through the repeated stitching back and forth, back and forth. This piece is called Fortune Telling, and it is one of those moments where I get to hold my grandma's hand as she caresses the palm of my hand and telling me my fortune. In the next few slides, I'll just share some of the images from this exhibit, kind of everything tying back to this exhibition. As you can tell, the size of my work, I really love to expand. And in these pieces, I really do think about the relationship between myself, to my mother, to my grandma, and to my dad. And these are the pieces that's in the show. I do have a story about this piece called The Onion. If you want to know what that means, come talk to me afterwards. In this piece, In Between the Lines, I'm really interested in the space between two destinations, the security lines and the checkpoints, and the immensity of being in limbo, waiting for what to come next. And of course, this is a picture of my dad, and this is how I remembered him, saying goodbyes and sending him off at LAX as he got into one of those long, winding custom and border security lines until he disappeared. I pick him up from the airport just as often, and I remember his phone calls at the same time every day. I remember him packing and unpacking luggages. These rituals are etched into my memory through repetition. It is also very familiar to immigrant families. I'll leave you with this most recent photo of my sweet grandma my mom sent me. I have mixed feelings about the word nostalgia, and something clicked when I read a passage from Michael Chabon in his New Yorker article, The True Meaning of Nostalgia. And this is what he wrote. For all that we do as artists, we're hoping for that moment of connection when we place a phone call directly into the past and hear an answering voice. It reminded me the way the Japanese family who dialed into the wind telephone. It's an act of connection and recognition. Thank you so much.